Attention span is a fickle force. We live in an age where 500,000 things can distract you from the task at hand, and if you were to relate this back to video games, you could always be playing something else. Holding a good narrative is hard at the best of times, but trying to factor in plot twists leaves it resembling a crapshoot. Good plot twists do exist, the perfect subversion of expectation and outcome that leaves the audience reeling from shock. But for every good case, there's the ill-conceived attempts to be dramatic that tend to bring out other, less desirable responses, like laughter. The best bit is the many different ways a plot twist can go badly. We've got instances where there wasn't any build-up to something that is still supposed to make sense within the story, some examples where there was so much foreshadowing that it doesn't really come off as any kind of twist, or my personal favourite, the kind of plot twist that regardless of development make no fucking sense whatsoever. So, regardless what I spend this video talking about, we're going to bizarre scenarios today. Maybe it would have been more appropriate if we weren't doing that. RPGs have some pretty wacky stories. Not entirely sure why, but I imagine it has something to do with the genre being deep-rooted in the world of fantasy, and how if you want a role to play in a video game, you're probably going to want something unique and fantastical. This means that some stories in some RPGs spend hours at a time twisting the plot so much that the potential energy rises to a point where the end result is like what we have in Secret of Mana, a JRPG released in 1993 that exists alongside Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger as the trio of amazing Square RPGs that came out for the SNES. I wouldn't say it's as good as either of the others, but it does have a monumental plot twist in there somewhere. Emphasis on mental. Secret of Mana, and really any other game in the Mana series, has the Tree of Mana be the important plot point. Basically, it's the focal point of all life energy in the world. Pretty important, but the bad guys are quite keen to destroy it. And they do, but that's not the plot twist. If we follow a 3-act story structure, the destruction of the Mana Tree kinda has to happen in order to set up the final act. That's not really the surprising bit. Besides, you need to show the determination of the bad guys, and destroying a whimsical tree acts as quite the statement of intent. As the Mana Tree withers, it even gives an opportunity to regale the player with what's going to be happening for the rest of the game, while also throwing a little nugget of info about the Mana Tree being the mother of the protagonist. Yeah, a tree gave birth to you. How's your lot on life now? I mean, it's not quite that simple since women become one with the Mana Tree when it withers, and your mother took it upon herself to take up the mantle, but the end result is that you find your long-lost mother and she's a tree. Not only that, but it feels like she's only the Mana Tree so we can enjoy a severely tacked-on emotional scene where she says goodbye to the protagonist. It's like saying that this slice of toast is your mother. Say goodbye to mother. As rivalries go, with the definition being that there's a certain amount of equality about the matchup while having enough key disparities to warrant the existence of a rivalry, few are set up better than the conflict between Batman and the Joker. Obviously it's a rivalry that exists outside of the world of video games, but the Arkham series did quite a good job of showcasing it. However, law of diminishing returns can set in before you know it, and so the Joker was killed off at the end of Arkham City, setting up the possibility for future games to tell a story without him. Up stepped Batman Arkham Knight, and it only fell over a few times. Optimization issues aside, I got a decent amount of fun out of this game. It played around with some decent dynamics. Batman is slowly becoming more corrupted, the Joker comes back as a vision of fear where Mark Hamill probably had more voice work than in the previous games combined, but the headline here was the titular and mysterious Arkham Knight. He's armed to the teeth with military-spec weaponry and a burning hatred of Batman. Who could this new and highly interesting antagonist be? I'm sure the shock of finding out that the Arkham Knight was a former Robin by the name of Jason Todd would have been stronger if they had built it up beforehand. Actually no, that wasn't the problem. The issue here was that Rocksteady went mad with foreshadowing. Seriously, you've got someone here with a fierce personal grudge towards the Caped Crusader. Who could it be if not the former Robin kidnapped and tortured by the Joker and forgotten by Batman? If it wasn't him, these scenes where Batman feels the guilt of leaving Jason Todd behind wouldn't make a lot of sense. And even when he is revealed, Jason Todd crumbles as a character. You get a boss fight of sorts with him and then maybe a scene total once his identity is revealed, but all this pent-up anger that's been boiling up for the whole game, pretty much gone. He won't be pointing any guns at Batman anytime soon. Maybe tone the foreshadowing down a bit. This was more like 6 or 7 shadowing. What made this reveal interesting, and it's probably not the right word to use, but it went back on what Rocksteady said about the Arkham Knight being a new character. He's definitely a new identity, but it says a lot when fans were predicting who the Arkham Knight was and getting it right months in advance. Jason Todd has a similar story in the comics. In the end, it's basically wasted effort. Whenever a game has a strong focus on atmosphere, there tends to be less emphasis put onto the story. Not to say that the plot is there as an afterthought, but if the whole game has an underlying mood to it, you don't have to force this point in cutscenes. Effectively, you can have a black and white plot, with the game's ambience filling everything with colour. Metroid was always pretty good at this. Not necessarily the most dramatic of storylines, but the mood held everything together very nicely. They didn't need to be too crazy. That was until Project M got hold of Metroid, and the series hasn't quite been the same since. Metroid Other M does a few good things, but for the most part it feels like an unnecessary departure from a lot of the franchise's strengths. Subtle nuggets of storytelling became massive dumps of exposition, and one of the most iconic female protagonists in all of gaming went from being the archetype of how to write female characters, especially as the lead, to someone who breaks down and broods at any given moment. So yeah, Other M didn't have the best writing in the world, but the worst part was saved for the game's finale, where the game's pretentious mother symbolism didn't even have a satisfying conclusion. Now, as it turns out, some weird science people decided to put the AI of Mother Brain into a woman by the name of Melissa Bergman. Except she's actually an android who can control Metroids because she's got Mother Brain's brain, and have I mentioned yet that this game is as subtle as a brick to the back of your head? And what makes this even better, even more of a vastly wacky thing to do, is that we've got a direct comparison of boss fights here. At the start of Other M, we see Samus reminiscing about the kick-ass Mother Brain fight from the end of Super Metroid. At the end of Other M, we see Samus confronted by weird bugs in the big showdown with the resurrected Mother Brain, who's actually a robot or something. I don't care. Not the best idea in the world. Older games didn't really need to worry about an intertwining plot that throws out plot twists like they're going out of fashion. The goal of games back in the 80s and the early 90s was to get kids with an even shorter attention span to play these games. You didn't worry too much about a story. But if you give an older game a sequel 20 years down the line, you should probably change that. Ah, the wonders of Bionic Commando. Never played it, at least not the original NES version, though I've heard it's pretty decent. What I played was the enhanced remake released a good 2 decades after the first game. And yeah, pretty good, grappling around is kinda fun. But really, this game is only here as a prelude, just the start of a plan to revive the Bionic Commando name and familiarise gamers of 8 years ago with the series. To do it properly, Capcom and developer Grin, I think it's Swedish or something, brought out a new game called Bionic Commando. Try not to get too confused. Anyway, in the 2009 Bionic Commando, there's a bit more of a plot going on. Nathan Spencer and his Metal Arm are trying to get some redemption for themselves and the organisation he works for after his own government betrays him and locks him up. It's not exactly Shakespeare. Spencer is even looking for answers about his missing wife, but you're more likely here for the gameplay, so who cares, right? Well, maybe you should, because Spencer does eventually find out where his wife is. And Shakespeare was into some wacky shit, but even he wouldn't have made it so that the protagonist's wife is actually a part of his bionic arm. Apparently, since Bionic Commando felt like it somehow needed to clarify the small plot point where your wife is part of your arm, this is relevant since the Bionics need to sync with their host on every level. Hence why Spencer's wife is clearly the best choice here. Far be it from me to say that this doesn't make a bunch of sense since I'm now wearing a clown mask, but this is a pretty left field choice for a character resolution. What would be funny is if some guy who makes countdowns on YouTube made a joke pertaining to whether or not spanking the monkey with a bionic arm is a single player or a multiplayer pursuit if your wife is living inside your arm. Yeah, would be funny if someone made that joke. Ah well. Usually the existence of a bad plot twist is an indication and a trait of bad storytelling, which usually filters down into the story itself and blots the tale beyond repair. Not saying that it will always ruin a narrative, but it doesn't bode well for the writer's vision. I say that it doesn't always ruin things because Xenoblade Chronicles spends dozens of hours weaving a tale of incredible world building and character development right up to the finale. It managed to strike up the right balance between grounded realism and the subversion of expectation. When we got to the final couple of chapters though, keeping up with what exactly is going on becomes pretty difficult. The problem with RPGs, or really I guess the plot of any game with lots of story, is that it starts out with a simple goal for the protagonist. Shulk wants revenge on Metalface for killing Fiora, and follows the path laid out by the visions granted by the Monado. Naturally, it gets more complicated when a bigger threat gets involved, and gets very complex when an even larger bad guy turns up, but the reality is that the two gods that inhabit the two giant titans get into a fight, and Zanza, who emerges from Shulk's body when he gets shot by Dixon, takes up the role of the true antagonist and god of creation in Xenoblade Chronicles. In trying to stop Zanza, the final chapter takes you from the familiar surroundings of Prison Island to space. You know, maybe that's not so bad, you are fighting the creator of the world, not entirely sure how you got here, but you can worry about that later. Defeating Zanza gives Alvis, a character you meet much earlier in the game who never really shows his true intentions or alignments, a chance to explain how Zanza and the Bionis and Mechonis came into being. Apparently he and a woman called Mayneth were scientists from Earth who tried to create a new universe, but fucked it up pretty badly, destroying the universe instead and causing both Zanza and Mayneth to be reborn as gods. Which is kind of okay, I can go along with that even if we don't get too many motives for any of these events, but the point I take issue with is the origins of Alvis. Someone who we never knew a lot about and I imagined would have some fascinating higher agenda. Nah, he's just the artificial intelligence on the spaceship when everything went to shit. It's so stupid and such a left field outcome that it almost resembles someone trying to explain a dream. Yeah, you were there, and the toaster was there giving me a lecture on the application of quantum mechanics when baking cookies, and it all sounds really dumb. Not to say that this ending is bad, it certainly closes everything up from the protagonist side of things, but if you really wanted to know who this Alvis character was, the end result, at least with me, was quite disappointing. This is RabbidLuigi, and I think the problem is that Xenoblade Chronicles didn't know when to stop giving out origin stories. I mean, sure, it can be very useful if you want to understand the reason behind the actions of the characters involved, but in this case, it actually brings up more questions than it answers. In a way, it undermines Alvis's character and really boils down all his efforts to, he's a computer, he's just following orders. It's a lesson to all of us, really, that even one of the best can drop the ball at the end. Got a topic that you'd like me to discuss in a countdown? Leave a suggestion in a comment below and head over to my Twitter where I'll be holding a vote to decide the subject of the next countdown based off the best of your submissions. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that. The last couple of countdowns I've done have all had some kind of spoilers in there, which isn't such a problem since I now use spoiler skips with the video annotations, but it's something I'd rather not have to deal with. There's a couple of things I have to add to the video when it goes up on YouTube, like a thumbnail and a video description, but forgetting the spoiler tags could potentially piss off a lot of people. It's not even anything to do with the topic, since last week's had very little to do with story, but hopefully we'll have something a little bit simpler next week. It's in your hands after all, try and be gentle.